All right, Khan, Shalom, Shalom, Israel, Shalom to the 12 tribes, Yasha, Ali, in the course, Allah, the glory and praise unto the Most High God, Yahweh, in the name of the Son, YAHAWASHI. This brother Yasha, Ali, coming back, y'all, yet another video through the Spirit power, Yahweh, BAHASHAM, Mashak, Malak, YAHAWASHI. All right, Shalom, Shalom, the Shabbat, Shalom. All right, and we're going to do a Sabbath service on here tonight through the Spirit to build this channel up, Most High willing. This video is also edifying unto the people. All right. So basically be going into who are the Greeks in the New Testament. All right, because Christians, brothers that may read the New Testament or whatever, and that's not studied up in the Old Testament are automatically going to think when they see the word Greek, they automatically think of the Caucasian race. Whatever they think of, they don't think that it's an Israelite. All right. Well, in the New Testament, the Greeks that we read about are actually Israelites. And that's through history, right? That's through lexicology. That's through looking at the blue letter, all right? That's looking at the Strongs, and that's also looking at the precepts, of course, all right? And that's how we understand who these Greeks are. And Khan, Shalom, Shalom. Khan, all praises, man. Khan, right? So let's get straight into this, man. I got a lot pulled up to the Spirit, a lot of information, history, and it's just good to know because even last camp, I was confronted by a brother that said, that these Greeks, he pulled Romans chapter 1, right? I'm gonna kick it off with that actually, right? He pulled Romans chapter 1, okay? Romans chapter 1 and verse 16. Now, if we're out on the highways of Bible, we have to know how to respond to these precepts that they may pull us, right? Romans chapter 1, verse 16. For I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ. This is Paul speaking. For it is the power of God unto salvation to everyone that believeth, to the Jew first, and also to the Greek. So he's like, look, it's to the Jew and to the Greek. Now, I asked that brother, are you a Jew or are you a Greek? And he said, no. I said, so how does this scripture apply to you? And then he had to run from that scripture. You see that? So this Greek here is not talking about, Alexander the Great or Philip the Macedonian or Ptolemy or Casamander. It's not talking about these Edomites, all right, so-called white people, Caucasian people. This Greek is not talking about that. These Greeks are talking about Israelites, and we can see that, and we can prove that, all right, through this Spirit, the power of YAHAWASHI and YAHAWASHI, all right. So these Greeks are talking about Israelites, all right. Now I'm gonna prove that Greeks are called, or Israelites are called Greeks, all right, because let's go to the book of Acts chapter 6 verse 1 first. All right, this is the book of Acts chapter 6 and verse number 1. All right, the book of Acts chapter 6 and verse number 1. Right, and let me know if everything's cool, right, and good, sound and everything. All right, Acts chapter 6, go lucky. Acts chapter 6 verse 1, it says, and in those days when the number of the disciples was multiplied, there arose a murmuring of the Grecians against the Hebrews, because their widows were neglected in the daily ministration. Now, these Grecians are actual Israelites. All right. This is a quick precept to prove that, yes, Israelites were called Grecians. And if anybody says, okay, well, how do you know that? Let's go into the original language. That's why we go into the language, right? And in those days, when the number of the disciples multiplied, right, there was a murmuring of the Grecians. That's how you know they're Israelites too. But we're going to first look at this word. But we see here initially that these Grecians are murmuring against the Hebrews. You see that? Are murmuring. Who is known in the Bible for murmuring? That would be Israel, all the way from the time of Moses. In the wilderness, they were murmuring and murmuring and murmuring, right? I'm going to put a quick precept on that in the book of 1 Corinthians. It is showing, there's already showing characteristics of ancient Israelites, these Grecians. And we're going to go into the word to prove precisely that they are Israelites without a shadow of a doubt. But just even looking at their characteristics, you see that they're murmuring, right? This is 1 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse number 10. I'm sorry, verse 9. It says, neither let us tempt Christ, as some of them also tempted. So in the wilderness, right, our forefathers tempted the Most High, right? That's in the book of Exodus, The Lord said, "Thou shalt not tempt the Lord your God." Or Salaki, that's in Deuteronomy. Salaki, that's in Deuteronomy chapter. Let's get this precept real quick, right? The Lord said, "Thou shalt not tempt the Lord thy God, as he did in Masada," right? Right. I'm gonna get that precept real quick, just to prove that, right? This is the book of well, actually, Salakia, right? This is Deuteronomy chapter 6. Oh yeah, Deuteronomy 6 and verse 16. It says, "Ye shall not tempt the Lord your God as he tempted him in Massah." Right? So we know that when you read that, our people tempted the Lord. All right, our people tempted the Lord, and therefore were destroyed. Now I'm gonna keep going, right? 1 Corinthians 10 and verse 9. Neither let us tempt Christ, as some of them also tempted and were destroyed as serpents. Neither murmur ye, as some of them also murmured and were destroyed of the destroyer. So our people is known for murmuring. So when we go back to this, even in Acts chapter 6, verse 1, we see that the Grecians were murmuring against the Hebrews. Now these Hebrews will be talking about the Israelites that knew that they were Israel. They were living in the land of Israel. They were speaking Hebrew. Or therefore they were called Hebrews in this context. But these Grecians are also Israelites too, but they're called Grecians for a reason. We're going to go into the history for that. It says a Hellenist, all right, one who imitates the manners and customs or the worship of the Greeks and use the Greek tongue. Now look at B. It says used in the New Testament of Jews born in foreign lands and speaking Greek. Greek speaking Jews. That's literally the definition in the Strongs for a Grecian. Now this is for this word only though. We know that when you go to the book of First Maccabees, you also have talks of the Grecians or the Grecian kingdom. Right, I'm gonna pull that precept real quick. All right, this is in this context in Acts chapter 6, verse 1. These Grecians in the New Testament are Jews born in foreign lands and speaking Greek. But when we go to the book of First Maccabees, all right, First Maccabees chapter 8, here's why they were called Greeks, though. Here's why they were called Grecians. First Maccabees chapter 8, because they were speaking Greek, first of all, right? They're speaking Greek and they're also a Hellenist. All right, but I'm gonna get this precept. First Maccabees chapter 8. I can pull it up on the screen. Oh yeah, and the water, right? That was first Deuteronomy chapter 6 and verse 16, the water. But I'm gonna pull it up on the screen real quick. All right. So like, all right, pull my screen back up. All right, pull my screen back up. Through the spirit. All right, so this is the book of First Maccabees chapter 8. All right, First Maccabees chapter 8 and verse number 17. Now this is going into the rising of the Roman Empire. We have to understand before we get to the New Testament, we have to understand the total context of what is going on. All right, we have to understand what's going on first. You can't just dive into the second part of a movie or something like that, third part of a movie. You know, you're watching the third, part of a long series of movies, and you think to understand fully what's going on, that would be foolish of you. You know, like for example, Star Wars. Star Wars has hella movies. I don't even know how many there is, like to the sequel or to the I don't even know how many Star Wars movies there are. But there's a lot. That's all I know. There's a lot. So when you look at that, you can't just dive into the third movie without watching the first two and think to have full understanding of the movie. That's impossible because you don't know what the hell happened in the first and second movie, right? So it's the same thing with going into the New Testament with having no prior knowledge of what happened in the Old Testament and what happened into the what they scholars would call the Protestant scholars, of course, would call the Inter-Testamental Period, which is the period of 400 years between Malachi and Matthew. Okay, they think that just nothing happened, and then you just get from Malachi and then boom, you and Matthew. Like, no, you can't. That's 400 years of history that you're totally ignoring. And we know that the Bible is also a history book. You have mentions of King Cyrus in the Bible. You have mentions of King Nebuchadnezzar II. These are actual kings that walked and reigned upon the earth, right? So the Bible's also conflates with history. You have accounts of King pharaohs of Egypt, Pharaoh Necho, Pharaoh Hophra, all these different pharaohs. You have accounts of that. You have even Alexander the Great, Alexander the Great in the Bible mentioned in First Maccabees. So we're going to go into First Maccabees, and we know that First Maccabees is very historical. You don't take it for its spirituality, and or if you don't take it as a so-called religious text, you have to at least take it for its historicity. All right, because you can literally go into First Maccabees and learn history. All right, but this is First Maccabees chapter 8. Now this is talking about the Roman Empire, and how they were rising up as an empire, because we know that the Roman Empire basically took over the Grecian Empire. All right, but this is First Maccabees chapter 8 verse 17. In consideration of these things, Judas chose Apollonius, the son of John, the son of Achos, and Jason, the son of Eleazar, and sent them to Rome to make a league of amity and confederacy with them, and to entreat them that they would take the yoke from them, for they saw that the kingdom of the Grecians did oppress Israel with servitude. So the kingdom of the Grecians, the kingdom of the Greeks, oppressed Israel with servitude. Now, how did that happen? How did the Greeks oppress us with great servitude? How did we become under slavery, under these Greeks? We have to first go to the start. We have to go to First Maccabees, the first chapter, right? That's where it all started. That's why we were called Greeks in the first place, right? First Maccabees chapter 1. It says, and it happened that after Alexander, son of Philip, the Macedonian, who came out of the land of Chittim, had smitten Darius, king of the Persians and Medes, that he reigned in his stead the first over Greece. So Alexander, the son of Philip. Who is this? Alexander the Great. This is literally Alexander the Great in the Bible. All right, and I'm gonna get this real quick. Let me see where did I put it at, right? Yeah, that's the Septuagint, right? That was the Septuagint. So basically the Salakia, hold on, Salakia. Let me pull this up. Khan and Shabbat Shalom to all the mighty men on the call right now, or the video, right? But let me pull this up real quick, Salakia Aki, right? Yeah, Khan, Alexander the Great, right? All right, Khan. So Alexander the Great, all right, Alexander the Great. So Alexander the Great, it says Alexander III of Macedon, commonly known as Alexander the Great, was a king of the ancient Greek kingdom of Macedon. He succeeded his father Philip II to the throne in 336 BC at the age of 20, and spent most of his ruling years conducting a lengthy military campaign throughout Western Asia and Egypt. So even Alexander the Great is mentioned in the scriptures, and he's also prophesied in the book of Daniel numerous times. All right, but when we go back to this, that's what started it. All right, that's what started it. And so we have to understand the period, or the concept of Hellenization. We have to understand that too. We have to understand the history and the concept of Hellenization, because Hellenization essentially is this, right? Hellenization is what it says is the adoption, right, rather, of Greek culture, religion, language, and identity by non-Greeks. In the ancient period, colonization often led to Hellenization of indigenous peoples. In the Hellenistic period, many of the territories which were conquered by Alexander the Great were Hellenized. So all the many of the territories that were conquered by Alexander the Great were Hellenized, meaning that they were converted. All right, they were taught and basically made and assimilated into the Greek culture. And let's go down here, right? Let's go down here. We know that the Grecian Empire, it says this is the map of the Hellenized Macedonian Empire. So Alexander the Great, he was able to conquer all of this. And even the four kings that came after them, as time came, or as time grew, or as time passed, they were expanding the empire a little, right? But this is where he conquered. So everywhere he went, he was literally having these cultures and these nationalities, these nations that he would conquer to assimilate into the Greek culture, fashion, um, uh, having them to speak their language, and so much that the Koine Greek became the lingua franca of the world at a certain point in time, meaning that it was the common language, just like how English is the common language right now, right, of the world. Greek was the common language of the world at that time, all right? And so you see here that he went from Macedon, he conquered Asia. This is Asia, all right? He came all the way to Armenia. He came all the way over here to Elam, all right? So he conquered all of this, but you also see that he conquered the Levant, all right? And which in he came through the Holy Land, or he came through our land. So when he came through our land, look, he literally had us to assimilate into the Greek culture and fashion. And you even have in the account of First Maccabees certain ungodly Israelites that wanted that to happen too. Let's go to First Maccabees chapter 1 and verse 11. All right. First Maccabees chapter 1 and verse 11. It says, in those days went there out of Israel wicked men, and who persuaded many, saying, let us go and make a covenant with the heathen that are round about us, for since we departed from them, we have had much sorrow. You see that? So there, out of Israel, there was wicked men that wanted to make a covenant with the heathen. Now, why does the Lord, because, and that's off, right? That's off. The Lord literally said, thou shalt not make no covenant with them. Really talking about the Canaanites, but in the sense of these other nations, the Lord doesn't want us messing with the other nations, right? And the reason why he says that is because your heart is going to be turned away from them. We know that Israel is likened unto sheep for a reason. Israelites are sheep. And the reason being is because sheep, they like to follow, right? Sheep are following. They just follow whatever. All right, well, we're going over here. All right, let's go. Let's go, right? Are we going over here? All right, let's go. That's Israel. So they see these nations doing all these different things. As soon as Israel start mixing among them, Israel just starts learning their works. He goes over to the Moabites, start worshiping the Moabite gods. He goes over to the land of Ammon. He starts worshiping the Ammonite gods. You know what I'm saying? And assimilating their culture. That's the common practice of the Israelite, right? He's very Israelite is very easy to be influenced by these other nations for one reason or another. That's why when the Lord said in Deuteronomy chapter 6 and verse number 3, it's like in verse 2, it says, and when the Lord thy God shall deliver them before thee, thou shalt smite them and utterly destroy them. Thou shalt make no covenant with them, nor show mercy unto them. Neither shalt thou make marriages with them. Thy daughter thou shalt not give unto a son, nor his daughter shalt thou take unto thy son. So he said, don't show any, don't make a covenant with them. Now, I was really talking in an initial context, talking about the Canaanites, but we can even apply this to these other nations as well, because every time we make a covenant with these other nations and try to hold hand in hand and assimilate with them, we start doing these things, right? They can covenants with them, and what we start with, verse 14, right? Whereupon they built a place of exercise at Jerusalem according to the customs of the heathen, and made themselves uncircumcised, and forsook the holy covenant, and joined themselves to the heathen, and were sold to do mischief. So we see here that they're building a place of exercise, which is a gymnasium, which means in the Greek to work out naked, all right, which is madness. It says at Jerusalem according to the customs of the heathen. So they wanted to be like the heathen. So therefore they did according to their works. So whenever we make covenants, ungodly covenants with these heathen, we want to start building gymnasiums. We want to start making ourselves uncircumcised. We want to start forsaking the high holy days and getting into their holy days and all this other stuff, wearing ourselves with wickedness, right? That's why the Lord said, look, don't even mess with them, because their heart is going to be turned. Your heart is going to be turned away from serving me. That's what the Lord is going to say in verse 4, right? Deuteronomy chapter 7 to verse 4. For they will turn away thy son from following me, that they may serve other gods, so will the anger of the Lord be kindled against you and destroy thee suddenly, man. Right? And we don't want that to happen. All right, we don't want that to happen. But guess what? Our people made covenants with the heathen anyway. Now, when you keep going down, that's why I'm not going to read the whole First Maccabees chapter 1, but if anybody reads First and Second Maccabees, you would have a better understanding of what's going on in the New Testament when Paul talks about the Jew and the Greek. When you see in accounts of John chapter 12 and verse 20, all right, which we're also going to go into too through the Spirit. You'll have a better understanding of the New Testament period if you read these things. If you read first and second Maccabees, there's a reason why it's in there. You know what I'm saying? It explains the historicity of Israel, right? Before Matthew, before Luke, before YAHAWASHI came into the scene, right? Which is something that we, should be able to get into and understand so we can have a better understanding of the so-called New Testament, right? Right. So but I'm gonna skip down. I'm gonna skip down to verse 41. Right, I'm gonna skip down to verse 41. It's First Maccabees chapter 1 verse 41. So this is King Antiochus Epiphanes IV, who was destroying our land, destroying Jerusalem, right? It says, moreover, King Antiochus wrote to his whole kingdom that all should be one people, and everyone that should leave his laws. So all the heathen agreed according to the commandment of the king. Yea, many also the Israelites consented to his religion and sacrificed unto idols and profaned the Sabbath. So many of the Israelites consented to this Edomite's religion, sacrificed unto idols, and profaned the Sabbath. So if King Antiochus wanted his whole kingdom to be one people, then you will no longer be called an Israelite. You will be called a Greek then, because he's a Greek. King Antiochus Epiphanes IV was not walking around calling himself an Israelite, because he's not an Israelite. He's a Greek. So if you wanted his whole kingdom to be one people, you're going to forsake, you understand, your nationality, and whatever you're called, you're going to call yourself a Greek, right? And that's the same type of concept that we see here in America. Forget where you came from. Forget your nationality. Forget that you're in America now. You are an American. You know what I'm saying? You are you're a United States citizen. You celebrate birthdays now. You celebrate Christmas now. You celebrate Halloween. You know what I'm saying? You do after the even that saying, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. You know what I'm saying? When you're in America, do as Americans do, right? Just assimilate yourself into this culture, to this national. That's how you know this. It's the same thing. The Lord said there's no new thing under the sun, right? But I'm gonna keep going. Verse 44. For the king had sent letters by messengers unto Jerusalem and the cities of Judah that they should follow the strange laws of the land and forbid burnt offerings and sacrifice and drink offerings in the temple, and that they should profane the Sabbaths and festival days. You see that? So that's what our people was doing at this time. That's what our people was doing at this time. All right. For years and decades and decades and decades, that's what our people were doing, forsaking the laws of the Most High and just doing whatever they wanted to do, doing as the manner of the heathen, doing as the manner of the Greeks, dressing like them, assimilating into their culture, speaking Greek. This even goes all the way back to the Septuagint, okay? Because during the Hellenistic period, in terms of when the Greeks were conquering, you understand, the Levant, right? We had to even make the Septuagint. We were forced to make the Septuagint. You understand? And so, what is the Septuagint? I'm gonna touch on that real quick. So the Septuagint. First, Slovakia. First, let's get an understanding of the Hellenistic world. It says the Hellenistic world is that world that was created after the conquest of the Near East by Alexander the Great at the end of the 4th century BC, and his conquest, which extended from India all the way through Egypt. See, we saw that on the map, right? Was divided into 3 main areas within 20 years after his death. And those 3 main areas were the Assyrian kingdom, the Seleucid kingdom, the Ptolemaic kingdom, right? The Ptolemaic kingdom, which would be, I believe, under us, right? Or he would have been over us, right, in Israel. God, you see that the Ptolemaic kingdom was from Egypt, really covering the Levant as well. All right, that would be the kingdom of Seleucus. That would be the kingdom of Lysimachus in Macedonia, right? It says, and what was the language and the culture of the Hellenistic world? Of course, the language and the culture of the Hellenistic world was Greek, right? It says what? That became the lingua franca of all these subject peoples. So that was the lingua franca. That's why we were speaking Greek. That's why when you go to Acts chapter 6 and verse 1, you see Israelites who are called Grecians, you understand? And they were speaking Greek because of the Hellenistic period that happened. All right, prior to Acts chapter 6, verse 1, prior, all right, to prior to Yahawashi coming onto the scene, prior to 40 AD, which was roughly the time of Acts chapter 6, right? Prior to that, this is in 3rd century BC, second century BC, right? It says what? I'm gonna go down to yeah, Khan. So it says Jewish culture and civilization. We know what they mean by Jewish, right? During the Hellenistic period was an intense dialogue with Hellenistic culture and civilization, beginning with the translation of Hebrew scriptures into Greek, which is what the Septuagint. So the Septuagint, right? This is how you know that we had a heavy Greek influence. The Septuagint was written or translated during the Inter-Testamental Period. All right. Remember that period between Malachi and Matthew, right? Those 400 years in which they say nothing really happened, but it was really those 400 years are crucial to our history, right? It says what? The Septuagint is what? Is an earlier extant Greek translation of books of from the Hebrew Bible. So basically, the Septuagint is the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible of the Torah, right? Of the Torah and the rest of the Old Testament, including the Apocrypha. So that's what the Septuagint is. The Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, of the Hebrew Bible, as they say, or the so-called Old Testament. All right. It says what? The first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible, known as the Torah or the Pentateuch, were translated in the mid-3rd century BC. The 3rd century BC. The remaining translations are presumably from the 2nd century BCE. All right. It says what? Now, actually, I want to get this in the Britannica because it's a little bit more reliable, right? It says the name Septuagint from the Latin Septuagint 70 was derived later from the legend that there were 72 translators, 6 from each of the 12 tribes of Israel, which is just a legend, right? Who worked independently to translate the whole and ultimately produce identical versions. So we were forced to translate our Hebrew text into Greek. That's how you have that Septuagint. All right, that's how you have the Septuagint. And remember, Septuagint means 70, right? Another legend holds that the translators were sent to Alexandria by Eleazar, the chief priest at Jerusalem, at the request of Ptolemy II, Philadelphus. All right, but it's unreliable as it says. It says what? Actually, I'm gonna skip down. Right, given that the language of much the early Christian church was Greek. What's the early Christian church? It would be that time in which Yahawashi, shortly after Yahawashi had died and rose again and was received up into the third heaven. Then you had the church with Peter, right? You understand Paul, the apostles, right? That's the early Christian church, and so they will also be speaking Greek as well, right? In fact, they wrote in Greek, the Koine Greek. Paul, he spoke Greek. When you go to the book of John, chapter 19, we know that Pontius Pilate wrote on Yahawashi's where Yahawashi was hung at. He wrote it in Greek. You understand? He wrote it in Greek, Hebrew, and Latin. I'm gonna get that precept real quick. All right, to prove that those 3 languages were actually prevalent in that time. All right, John chapter 19. Book of John chapter 19. All right, John chapter 19 and verse number. Oh, Salaki. I think I skipped it. John chapter 19, verse 19. And Pilate wrote a title and put it on the cross, and the writing was Yahawashi Nazareth, the King of the Jews. This title then read many of the Jews, for the place where Yahawashi was crucified was nigh to the city, and it was written in Hebrew and Greek and Latin. So Hebrew, Greek, and Latin were languages that were spoken. All right, and remember, this is during the time of Yahawashi, so this is about 30 to 33 AD, roughly. All right, so it says, and it was written in Hebrew, Greek, and Latin. You see that? So we still see here in 33 AD that Greek is being spoken in Israel, right? Hebrew, Greek, and Latin. Latin, of course, because of the Roman influence. All right. It says, what then said the chief priest of the Jews to Pilate, right? Not the king of the Jews, but that he said, I am the king of the Jews. All right. But that's different. That's something else. So when we go back to this, it says, given that much of the early Christian church was Greek, many early Christians relied on the Septuagint to locate the prophecies that they claimed were fulfilled by Christ. Jews considered this a misuse of Holy Scripture and stopped using the Septuagint altogether. Its subsequent history lies within the Christian church. All right. And we see here that and I'm gonna get an account of that. I'm gonna get an account of that to prove that there was heavy Greek influence. We see here in the New Testament in Israel, it was heavy Greek influence. Why? Because what happened in First and Second Maccabees. You understand? King Antiochus having to force us to speak Greek and to not allow ourselves to even call ourselves a Jew, as it states also in the book of Second Maccabees, the 6th chapter, and verse 6 on down. We couldn't even speak and profess ourselves to be a Jew. You couldn't claim your nationality. You couldn't claim your heritage. That would be against its law. That's why we had to run into caves to keep the Sabbath. That's why we had to literally force ourselves to keep the law, statutes, commandments of the Most High, because they didn't want us calling ourselves Jews. They wanted us to forget our nationality, right? So if you couldn't call yourself a Jew, what would you have to be called? You would have to be called a Greek, right? But it says what I'm gonna go to this real quick. I'm gonna prove that we used the Septuagint in the New Testament, not all the time. I wouldn't say all the time, but we did use it sometimes. All right, because when you go to the book of Acts chapter 7, this is Stephen. All right, this is Stephen, and so he's giving an account of our history. Acts chapter 7 and verse number 13, right? And at the second time Joseph was made known to his brethren, and Joseph's kindred was made known unto Pharaoh, right? Then sent Joseph and called his father Jacob to him and all his kindred, 60 souls. 60 is 60 and 15. So 60 is 60. 60 plus 15 is 75. So he's saying that 75 souls, right? It says, then sent Joseph and called his father to him and all his kindred, 60 and 15 souls. So he's including Joseph and his father and all his kindred, right? So he's saying all of them together is 75 souls. 75 souls. All right. Now he's saying 75. He's saying 75. Let's see what the Masoretic text says. Right? Let's see what the Old Testament says. It's a book of Exodus. Actually, it's like Genesis. Genesis. It's like Genesis chapter 48 and verse number. All right. Genesis 47. Gone. No, it's lucky. What I have written down. "46. It's lucky. This is the book of Genesis, chapter 46 and verse 26. All the souls that came with Jacob into Egypt, which came out of his loins, besides Jacob's sons' wives, and all the souls were 66, so 66, right? And the sons of Joseph, which were born in him in Egypt, were 2 souls. All the souls of the house of Jacob, which came into Egypt, were 60. Old Testament says 60, which is 70. Stephen says 60, which is 75. So which one is it? Because even when we go to the book of Deuteronomy, I believe this is chapter 10 that I want, but I check, right? Deuteronomy chapter 10, right? Nah, it's lucky. It's not that. It's not that, right? Even in Deuteronomy chapter, see that I'm looking right at it, but it's mad. All right, all praises. Deuteronomy chapter 10, verse 22. Thy fathers went down into Egypt with 10 persons, and now the Lord thy God hath made thee as the stars of heaven for multitude. So Deuteronomy chapter 10, verse 22 says 10 persons, which is 70. So we have two witnesses right there, Deuteronomy 10 and 22 and Genesis chapter 46, that there were 10 persons that came into Egypt. But Joseph is saying 10 score or 60, 15 persons, which is 75, which is an extra 5 people. Now, here's what's interesting. When you go to the LXX, in Genesis chapter 46, right? Remember, we went to Genesis 46 in the Old Testament. Remember, the Old Testament in the KJV is translated off of the Masoretic text, right, which is the Hebrew, all right? But we know we also have the Septuagint that we talked about was the Greek translation of the Hebrew text, all right, that we had to translate, all right? Now, let's read it in the LXX. In Genesis chapter 46, you go down here, all right? You go down here. Genesis chapter 46, verse 26. And all the souls that came with him into Egypt, who came out of his loins, besides the wives of the sons of Jacob, all the souls were 66. And the sons of Joseph, who were born to him in the land of Egypt, were 9 souls. All the souls of the house of Jacob, who came with Joseph into Egypt, were 75 souls. So in Genesis chapter 46, we see here in the LXX, in the Septuagint, right, that it says 75. But in the Masoretic text, it says something different. It says 70, right? So, and we see here in Acts chapter 7 that Stephen is saying that it was 75 souls, agreeing with the Septuagint, which shows us that Stephen was using the Septuagint as his source. He was reading the Septuagint, right? So we see here that there was a heavy Greek influence, you know what I'm saying, in the so-called New Testament era, in the land of Israel, right? I'm gonna get another precept to prove that. Hopefully that makes sense, right? And Khan, Shabbat Shalom, right? So this is some heavy, some heavy stuff, right? It's a little heavy, all right? Yeah, Khan, it's a little heavy, right? But let's go to the book of John, chapter 12, and verse number 20. All right, I'm gonna go to John chapter 12 and verse 20. Some quick cuts right here, right? I don't want to go too, deep, but hey, sometimes you got to get deep, man, through the spirit. It's John chapter 12, verse 20. And there were certain Greeks among them that came up to worship at the feast. Now, what feast is this? Now, you might think, okay, well, these are Greeks, you know what I'm saying? There's just regular, you think it's this guy. These guys came up to worship at the feast. These guys came up to worship at the feast in Jerusalem. You got to be kidding me, eh? These guys did not come up into Jerusalem and keep the feast. Because what feast is this talking about, right? John chapter 12, verse 20. Anyone that says that Israelites are not called Greeks is wrong, man. Because it says, and there were certain Greeks among them that came up to worship at the feast. What feast is this? This feast is talking about the Passover. It's talking about the Passover. Because if you go to the next chapter, what's in the next chapter? John chapter 13, verse 1. Now before the feast of the Passover. So this is the feast that is talking about, Passover. All right. So knowing that Greeks came up to Jerusalem to keep the Passover, we know that that's a law in the scriptures. Let's go to the book of Exodus. All right, chapter 22. Actually, it's like Exodus 23. Exodus 23 and verse 14. 3 times thou shalt keep a feast unto me in the year. This is the law for Israel. All right. Thou shalt keep the feast of unleavened bread. That's the Passover, right? Thou shalt eat unleavened bread 7 days, as I commanded thee in the time appointed of the month of Abib. For in it thou camest out from Egypt, and none shall appear before me empty. You see that? So 3 times in a year we had to appear before the Lord, and that's the feast. That's the feast of unleavened bread. That's the feast of the harvest, all right, which is Pentecost, 50 days after, and that would be also the third, so like the feast of ingathering, which would be what's actually coming up, the feast of tabernacles. All right. So those are the 3 times that Israelites had to appear before the Lord in the year. All right, to keep those 3 high holy days. Passover being the one that we're talking about. So let's go to the book of Exodus. Let's see the ordinance of the Passover. Okay. Go to the book of Exodus, chapter 12, and verse number 42. Right? I'm sorry, verse 41. And it came to pass at the end of the 430 years, even the self-same day, it came to pass that all the hosts of the Lord went out of the land of Egypt. Verse 42. It is a night to be much observed unto the Lord, for bringing them out of the land of Egypt. For this is that night of the Lord to be observed of all the children of Israel in their generations. Talk about the children of Israel. Verse 43. And the Lord said unto Moses and Aaron, this is the ordinance of the Passover. There shall no stranger eat thereof. Meaning you cannot have a heathen eating of it. Right? There shall no stranger eat thereof. All right. In the Hebrew, it literally says, and the Lord and said Yahawah unto Moses and Aaron, this the ordinance of the Passover. There no son of the stranger eat thereof. Right? No stranger eat thereof. And that word for stranger means alien. All right. When you go into the Hebrew. Let's get this real quick. Right? Foreign, alien, foreignness, that which is foreign. Nikar. All right.
Strong's H5236. Nechar. Nechar.
Yeah, so we see here that if you're a heathen, you can't eat of the Passover, man. You can't eat of the Passover. You can't just come up and just eat the Passover if you along with another Israelite, man. Like you're equal to us. The Lord never said that the Israelites are equal to the other nations. He never said that. You see that? So literally, these Greeks that came up to worship at the feast, they're Israelites. Because we see here that there's no stranger, no heathen to eat of the Passover. And we see that they're trying to eat of the Passover at Jerusalem. They're trying to keep these laws of the Most High because they know that they're Israelites. But they're called Greeks because of where they're from. Maybe they spoke Greek. Maybe they were dressing like Greeks. They still were of the Greekish fashion. Therefore, they are called Greeks. John was written by an Israelite. You coming into Greece dressed in all this Greekish attire, you may be Israelite by bloodline, but you're coming into Israel with all this Greekish fashion on. You know what I'm saying? You're going to be labeled as a Greek by the Jews. You're going to be seen as a Greek, and they don't even want to deal with you, right? Because the Jews, remember, it goes back to First and Second Maccabees. First and Second Maccabees, Judas Maccabeus, right, and his army totally was opposed to the Grecian Empire. That's why when the Greeks came, right, nations would try to bring us down. The Hasmonean Empire would try to bring them down, all right. But Judas Maccabeus and his army continued to fight against the Grecian Empire because they didn't want to be assimilated into the culture. They didn't want to speak Greek. They spoke Hebrew, right? So it's kind of like it's like that, but you still had Israelites that still was either forced to convert to it or willingly converted to it. Therefore, they're generation to generation. You don't even know that you're Israelite anymore. Your child. You know what I'm saying? Doesn't even know that he's an Israelite. All he knows is that he's a Greek. And so it's the same thing like now. You have Jakes in the world calling themselves African Americans. You have Jakes in the world calling themselves blacks. You have Jakes in the world calling themselves whatever country they came from. And when they understand through the spirit and bear witness that, oh shoot, I'm an Israelite, then they start practicing it. All right. Because let's go to the book of Acts chapter 18. No new thing under the sun, man. Acts chapter 18 and verse 4. And he reasoned in the synagogue every Sabbath and persuaded the Jews and the Greeks. Reason why it's a juxtaposition between Jews and Greeks is because these Jews actually know who they are, but these Greeks don't know who they are. That's why they're still being called Greeks, because they might still, like I said, speak Greek, or they might still be addressed in that attire or come from that state of mindset, right? That's why they're called Greeks. And it's the same thing with our people being strangers. Like if you weren't born into the land, if you weren't born in the land of Israel, even during the time, all right, of Leviticus of the so-called Old Testament, you were deemed a stranger because you were not born in the land, right? So it's the same thing with the Greeks, right? It's the same thing with the Greeks, right? It's not talking about no Edomites, right? It's not talking about Edomites, man, right? We see that. Let me get this precept as well, right? Let's go to the book of Psalms, chapter 15, verse 16. Right? Psalms chapter 15, verse 16. Right? And this is what the Lord also said to the actual Greeks, the actual Edomites, man. Psalms 15, verse 16. But unto the wicked God saith, what hast thou to do to declare my statutes? Or that thou shouldest take my covenant in thy mouth? So the Lord said unto the wicked, what do you have to do to declare my statutes? Why in the hell would actual Greeks, by nationality, these Edomites, be coming up and worshiping at the feast and wanting to see YAHAWASHI? Why would they want to see YAHAWASHI? You know, YAHAWASHI called King Herod. It's like YAHAWASHI called King Herod a fox. He said, go and tell that fox. You know, he said, go and tell that fox, bro. There's no reason why actual Edomites will want to come and see YAHAWASHI. YAHAWASHI said, but those my enemies, which will not, that I should reign over them, bring hither and slay them before me. Talking about people that don't want him to rule over. And these other nations don't want YAHAWASHI to rule over them. Otherwise, they would have been submitting, right? They would have been acknowledged the fact that we are Israelites and that we're God's chosen people and that YAHAWASHI is the one true God. But they didn't say, they're not going to say that. They're not going to come out and actually acknowledge that as a nation of people, right? So there would be no reason for them to even want to come to YAHAWASHI. They're too busy indulging in the wickedness. The Lord said, you don't have any reason to declare my statutes, right? It says, seeing thou hatest instruction and casting my words behind thee, right? And that's what Edomites do. They cast the words of the Lord behind them. They say, oh, the Lord says thou shalt not kill. Oh, I'm going to kill it. The Lord said thou shalt not commit adultery. Oh, I'm going to push the agenda that committing adultery is cool and that you should do it, right? And I should also be an adulterer as well. Oh, the Lord says that you can't lie down with a beast. I'm gonna do that then. That's Esau is created to be contrary to the Lord. So why in the hell would he want to come and seek YAHAWASHI and keep the feast of Passover, the Passover at Jerusalem, when the Passover has nothing to do with Edomites? It has nothing to do with Edomites. It has nothing to do with these other nations. It's about literally Israel, the Lord delivering Israel out of Egypt. So it wouldn't make any sense, man. That's how you know these Greeks are Israelites, because they're coming back to their true heritage and nationality. I'm gonna get a precept. Let's go to the book of Esther, chapter 8, verse 18. Okay, because in like manner, it's like Esther chapter 8 and verse 17, right? In like manner, right? I'm gonna read it first, right? Let's go to Esther chapter 8, verse 17. And in every province and in every city, whithersoever the king's commandment and his decree came, the Jews had joy and gladness, a feast and a good day. And many of the people of the land became Jews, for the fear of the Jews fell upon them. So no, you can't switch your ethnicity or nationality. It's not possible. You can't just wake up one day, you're a Moabite, and then the next day you are an Israelite, or the next day you're Edomite. You just switched your nationality. You can't do that. When it says, and many of the people of the land became Jews, doesn't mean it's not literal. In practice, but not, nature. They became Jews in practice, but not in nature. I'm going to prove that, right? The Hebrew word for Jew is Yehuda or Yahawah, or it's like Yahawada. That's the Hebrew word for Judah. Okay. Let's compare these two words real quick. So, the Hebrew word for Jew is Yehuda or Yehudi in the modern Hebrew. Okay. Yehudi. You see that? Yehudi, Strong's H 3064, right?
Strong's H 3064. Yehudi.
Yehudi, Jew. Judah, right? Yehudi. Now let's keep going down, right? That's the word for Jews, right? The Jews had joy and gladness, a feast and a good day, and many of the people of the land became Jews. Now, this is a different Hebrew word. It's not Yehudi for that word for became Jews. It's not Yehudi. It's what? Yahad.
Strong's H 3054. Yahad.
It's different. You see that? It says to become a Jew, in fact, or in fraud, become Judaized. So these people, these other nations, rather, right? These actual heathen, because we force these heathen to assimilate into our culture. We forced them to start keeping the laws, such commandments, and they became Jews, not in nature, but in practice. They became Judaized. We forced them to start keeping the laws, such commandments, and worshiping Yahawah and Yahawashi. Right? But they were called Jews. It says they became Jews, right? Because if you're practicing the Greekish fashion, you're wearing Greek clothing, you're speaking Greek, hey, I mean, hey, you damn there a Greek then. You know what I'm saying? You have the Greek mindset, you in philosophy, and you fornication, and you eating grapes and working out naked, and you just doing everything that a Greek person does. You damn there a Greek now. You're a Greek. Hey, Jew will call you. You're a Greek, right? You know what I'm saying? Because you're actually doing what Greeks do. And you start you come into this truth. You start doing the things that Israelites do, right? Wearing fringes, this and third. Now you're not. Let's say a Moabite starts keeping the commandments. It's like, damn, he damn near Israelite. He's Jewish. He's something like a Jew because you know what I'm saying? He's doing what Israelite does. But the thing is, he's not an Israelite by nationality. Of course not. He's still a Moabite though. Like Ruth, even though she was cleaving, she was worshiping the Most High Yahweh and Yahawashi. She was cleaving unto Israel. She was like, your people is my people, and your God is my God. So that's what she was saying, right? She's still a Moabite, but she's trying to assimilate into our culture though. You see that? So the same way we want to assimilate into the other cultures, nationalities, we're even forced to. That's why we're called Greeks. Our children were uncircumcised, just like them. Just like the Greeks. It's actually an abomination for the Greeks and the Romans to circumcise. They didn't. That's not something that they did. So, assimilated into the Greek culture, we didn't circumcise our children. That's why even when you go to the New Testament, you have that big stratification, or not stratification, but you have that big controversy rather between the Jews and the Greeks about circumcision, because the Jews that knew they were Jews, they were rooted and built up, they were grounded, they didn't assimilate into the culture. Being circumcised was one of the big things that these Israelites were. It was something foreign to them, right? I'm gonna get an article on that too. Right? Is it this? Let me see if this is the article, right? Yeah, kind of. Yeah, this might be it, but it says what, right? I'm gonna go down, right? So basically, right, It says the book of Maccabees, one of the books of the Apocrypha, tells the story of the Jewish revolt about 150 years before the time of the New Testament, right? The Greeks, led by Antiochus Epiphanes, conquered the land of Israel and forced the Jews to leave their national heritage and the Torah and began following the Greek culture, as we just read, right? First Maccabees. Because of the Jews' hatred for all things Hellenistic, including the culture and language, Judas Maccabee led the revolt against Antiochus Epiphanes, destroying the Greeks and slaughtering those Jews that had adopted the Greek language and culture. This revolt demonstrates the Jewish hatred of the Hellenistic culture and the incorrect assumption that the Jews freely adopted the Greek language during the time of the New Testament. We didn't freely adopt it. It was forced on us. We know that certain of us did, as we read in First Maccabees, but not for the most part, no, right? This divide between the Jews who remained faithful to the Torah and the Jewish culture and those who rejected the Torah and adopted the Greek culture continued to exist into the 1st century AD. Into the New Testament, that's the 1st century AD. It says what? The Jews that adopted the Greek language and culture and language are called Hellenes. And what's the Greek word, right? What does Hellenes mean in English? It means Greek, right? I'm gonna prove that. So you should see now how the history lines up. You see that? Helen, Greek, right? Helen, Greek. So we see here, right? Slocky. Where is it at? So we see here the Jews that adopted Greek culture and language were called Hellen. All right. It says the word Hellenes is the word used in the New Testament, where it is usually translated as Greek, but sometimes Gentile, but does not refer to native Greeks, but to Jews who have adopted the Greek culture and language. So we even see here on the article, I didn't have to read this article to know that, but it substantiates the scriptures, man. It substantiates the scriptures. It literally says that it does not refer to native Greeks, meaning to Edomites, right? It doesn't refer to Edomites. When we read Greek in the New Testament, it doesn't refer to Edomites, but to Jews who have adopted the Greek culture and language. That's why they were called Greeks by their fellow Israelites. And you also have that tension, man. That's why you have the Grecians murmuring against the Hebrews, you know. You have Acts chapter 15. Why are these Greeks, you know what I'm saying, they're not getting circumcised? You know what I'm saying? You even have that saying, I believe it was an ancient saying that it is better to eat pork than to speak Greek, man, because that's how much that these Jews despise the Greeks, you know, and the Greek is fashion. So when they see Greeks coming and trying to, you know, keep the commandments, of course, their first initial thought is, what the hell is going on? It's that envy. And it goes all the way into Romans 11 and all the other stuff, but that's a different topic. Right now, we're just focusing on the Greeks, right? Right now, we just focusing on the Greeks. So we see here, and this article is cold because it literally says that these Greeks are actually Jews in the New Testament. And that's why we have to get into the Inter-Testamental Period, right? That's why. Salakia, where's this article at also? Yeah, because from Malachi to Matthew is how many years, right? The 400 years. It says between Malachi and Matthew, 400 years passed in the Holy Land for which we have no prophetic record, meaning no prophets rose up. Which much happened during this period that affects our understanding of the New Testament. So even this says that you have to study this period going into 1st and 2nd Maccabees, because that would affect your understanding of the New Testament. Imagine not knowing 1st and 2nd Maccabees and diving into the New Testament. You're going to automatically think that these Greeks are not Israelites, right? It says, so it is important to be familiar with at least the major events that occurred in this intertestamental period, right? That's why it's good to familiar ourselves with that. Now, I'm going to get the preset real quick, right? Let me get this preset. I just want to go to Second Maccabees real quick, right? Second Maccabees. And brothers already know, right? Brothers already know, but just as a refresher, right? And for people that may not know, let's go to Second Maccabees chapter 6 and verse number 6. It says, neither was it lawful for a man to keep Sabbath days or ancient feast, it should be feast, or to profess himself at all to be a Jew. So if you couldn't profess yourself to be a Jew, then what could you be called? A Greek. That's what you would be called, a Greek. If you couldn't call yourself a Jew, you would be called a Greek. And remember, this is before the New Testament, but that's why you have the Judas Maccabean revolt, the Maccabean revolt, because they wasn't having that. I can't call myself a Jew. I can't speak Hebrew. I got to speak Greek. And to hell with that. That's why our forefathers were fighting so hard, right, against this. But we see here that, look, if you're calling yourself a Jew, you will have to be killed, man. If they caught you keeping the law, statutes, and commandments of the Most High, you would be killed. You know, as it states. Let's go down to verse 9. And whoso would not conform themselves to the manners of the Gentiles should be put to death. Then might a man have seen the present misery. So if you didn't conform to that, you're still calling yourself a Jew on the low. You're still calling yourself an Israelite. You're still wearing your fringes. If you didn't conform to the Greekish fashion, you would be put to death. So it's either A, you choose the Most High and die in the name of the Lord, or you can choose being a Greek and assimilating to that culture, start speaking Greek and whatnot, and then, you know what I'm saying, you'll be A-okay, right? So that's what our forefathers had to face. So if you want to completely just ignore all that and go into the New Testament talking about, oh, it's not a Jew nor a Greek, oh, this and the third, Greeks came up to the feast, this and the third, right? And you want to start, hey, it's to your own destruction, man. Right? It's going to be to your own destruction. All right. Now I want to make sure I had covered also this aspect of it real quick, so I can, right? Yeah, let's go to Acts chapter 16, verse 1 real quick. All right, going into Timothy. It says, then came he to Derbe and Lystra, and behold, a certain disciple was there named Timotheus, the son of a certain woman which was a Jewess and believed, but his father was a Greek. So Timothy, this is Timothy, right? Timothy's mother was a Jew. She was also in the truth and believed. See that? But his father was a Greek. So his father wasn't in the truth. He was in the world, right? That's what that means. He was a Greek. It's not talking about he's an Edomite. Because let's go down to verse 3. Him what Paul have to go forth with him and took and circumcised him because of the Jews which were in those quarters, for they knew all that his father was a Greek, which also proves that the Jews knew that you are where your father is. Because if it's about your mother, they would have been like, oh, it's cool, he's an Israelite. If it's by your mother, that is. Or if it's a 50-50, they would have been like, well, we're not really tripping because he's half a Jew. No, he said, well, his father's a Greek, right? Meaning he was in the world, was doing whatever, right? So, but he's still an Israelite, though. Because Paul wouldn't have circumcised him, man, if that was the case, right? Timothy wouldn't have been on fire, been in the truth if that was the case there. You know what I'm saying? And we're proving all through these precepts, this whole video, that these Greeks in the New Testament are Israelites, right? They were just assimilated into those Greekish fashion. All right, that's all. All right. Oh yeah, that really should, you know what I'm saying, be all that. Even in just a quick point in Revelation 9 and 11, it says, and they had a king over them, which is the angel of the bottomless pit, whose name in the Hebrew tongue is Abaddon, but in the Greek tongue hath his name Apollyon. So we see here, even in Revelation chapter 9, John knowing the two languages, Hebrew, Abaddon, and the Greek, Apollyon. You see that? So John even knew both languages. Paul knew both languages. In Acts chapter 21, he's asked, "Canst thou speak Greek?" Okay. It says, "And as Paul was to be led into the castle, he said unto the chief captain, May I speak unto thee? Who said, Canst thou speak Greek?" See that? He was asked if he can speak Greek. And Paul, being a learned man, he knew Greek, he knew Hebrew, and he understood Latin as well as he talked to the Romans. All right. But yeah, Khan. So that's really all I have right now, honestly, through the Spirit, right? That's really all I had right now through the Spirit. But just to let brothers know, man, those Greeks that we see here in the New Testament, you know what I'm saying? We were writing Greek, okay? For a long time, we were writing Greek. We were reading the LXX, the Septuagint. You know what I'm saying? We were referring to that in terms of our scriptures. We had a heavy Greek influence, during the so-called New Testament because of the history that happened in First and Second Maccabees. That's why we should read First and Second Maccabees, right, to understand that, and to get that wider perspective. And there's also a lot of history, a lot of articles on the internet as well that shows it playing out, But to close out, I'm gonna get a closing precept through the Spirit, right? I'm gonna get closing precept, right? All right, this is the book of Sirach, chapter 5, and verse 15. All right, Sirach, chapter 5, and verse number 15. And it reads, "Be not ignorant of anything in a great matter or a small." So we don't want to be ignorant in anything in a great matter or in a small matter. You might look at, those Greeks are actually Israelites. And there's many ways you can attack it though. You can always go to prophecy. You know what I'm saying? If we bring out all this information to somebody and they still is like, well, I think, it's really Gentile. It's Gentile. Well, then it would just go to the prophecies. You know what I'm saying? There's so many prophecies that state that, the other nations, they're going to go into slavery under the Israelites and obey the Israelites in the kingdom of heaven. Isaiah 14:1. It's so many. There's so many precepts. Revelation 13:10. So as we see here that there's many precepts in that, we can even go to the prophecy, which is to deal in the historicity and through the precepts, all this other stuff, the lexicology, that would be it, man, through the Spirit, right? So all praises to YAHAWASHI, the water for tuning in, all right? Kwame Yasha Allah, Shabbat Shalom, Shalom.